What's going on, everybody? LK here, and today I want to talk about a pretty new but important problem that fighting games have. Been talking about this a lot recently. Fighting games have a big input delay problem. So if you don't know what that is, we're talking about how responsive the games are to your inputs in terms of frames. Pretty recently it came up again because the homie Sajam made a video about input delay based off a series of tweets that I made. So I recently went to a tournament called Defend the North to play Guilty Gear Strive. This is a tournament in New York City. This year they tried something different. They tried something that everyone said could not be done. This tournament, Defend the North, ran exclusively on PC. So specifically, they had, I want to say, 48 laptops, and every single fighting game outside of retro fighting games were ran on PC. So after the tournament, I shared some thoughts on Twitter. So the tweets are here. So basically saying that I thought GG was basically a success, and I was thinking a lot about PC in general because I mean, one, they kind of proved that it could be done. Take some planning, of course, and some extra support, but the really big thing for me is this discussion about delay is very important. I've talked about input delay in fighting games before, but I want to revisit it so I can talk about it from a slightly different perspective, because I think if you only just straight talk about the numbers, most people would have the same reaction of why not just get the games to be as responsive as possible, which makes sense. So I'm going to try to go back. We could talk about what the problem is, how did we get here, and what can be done. The simple way to describe the problem is that, the simple way to describe this input delay problem is that for the first time in fighting game history, basically our current age in fighting games are being made to be played at home and not in arcades, which of course makes sense with everything that's been going on in the world. But the problem with this is that there are a lot of ways you can play video games at home. You can play on the base PS4 or the standard PS4, old PS4, whatever you want to call it. That's generally what I play on. You can play on the PS4 Pro if you're a hipster. You can play on the PS5 if your girlfriend got you one. You can play on a PC if you got some money. There's a lot of ways you can play this game, and each of these have a different delay. So there's delay, we call this native delay, built into each platform. The main thing is though, is that out of all of these, generally the PC versions of fighting games let you do things to reduce the delay, things like turning off VSync and things like that. So in the past, the reason why PC was such a popular option was because rollback was not the main netcode that games used. Instead, they used a delay-based netcode where the further away you were for the person, the more input delay this would add. This, of course, feels awful to play on if someone is very, very far, but by reducing the delay, and Exert has the same thing as Strive, where you can reduce the delay from 4 frames to 1 frame, you could make delay-based netcode more tolerable, and if someone was really close to you, it basically felt like offline. It was great. And for Exert, it's not such a big deal because the game itself is fast. It's based off Guilty Gear XX, which means it shares a lot of frame data with Guilty Gear XX. Guilty Gear XX in arcades was a 3-frame delay game from my research, and things are extremely quick. We'll actually go and talk about specific numbers a little bit later, but changing Exert from a 4-frame game to a 1-frame game doesn't really do that much to the game because everything's fast. A lot of things are basically instant or just extremely hard to react to in even a 1-frame context. However, Strive is not like Exert. In Strive, they revamped a ton of things, changed the way a lot of things work, just like their more modern fighting games like Dragon Ball FighterZ, even like last gen games like BlazBlue and Persona, they slowed things down kind of. So by reducing the delay, you change the game a lot. So the perspective I want to take, and why I'm always like, I feel like they make the games with delay in mind, it comes from looking at the speed of everything that the characters have in the game. And the reason why I think about this a lot and I'm concerned about it is because I don't want characters to be left behind. It really feels like, I got this from Dragon Ball FighterZ more than anything else, but you could definitely feel it in GG as well. They really want people to be able to play any character they want to play. Like if you like a character, you should just be able to play them. But if they are making the characters based off a game that has more delay, if you reduce the delay, some characters are just out of the game. So I'm gonna go through a little bit of history about some older games first with some examples, and then go back to Strive. So again, I'm only talking about Arc System Works games here, as that has been my main focus for a long time. at the beginning, they make all these games for arcade. As I mentioned before, Guilty Gear XX was like a 3-frame game, and everything is very, very fast. Xrd shares a lot as far as speed with XX. I mean, it's based off Sharp Reload, as I've said before. So moves in older Guilty Gear games are very, very, very fast. So you can see it in things like jab, how throws are set up, and then some like mix-up situations that aren't your traditional like air dash high or land low situation. Millia, for example, her 2P is in the, so this is her crouching punch. This is in the fastest group of jabs at 13 frames. A lot of jabs in this game are like 13 to 16 frames total. So that's from the beginning until the end of the move. So that means this thing, literally by the time you see that, that thing is done and they're doing something else. It's a pretty common theme for offense in this game, for example. Then even things like this and this. So this is a Bad Moon, 6K. 6K is her ground command overhead. Bad Moon is like her famous overhead, it's an instant overhead. Both of these are less than 20 frames. So 6K specifically, 6K is 19 frames, so it's less than 20 frames, right? 1 frame, right? Easy. It usually hits crouchers a little bit later because it has to go all the way down, where Bad Moon is basically just like instant. There is pinch like of minimum height, like you can't do it as soon as you leave the ground, but at 11 frames startup in the air plus jump startup in the game is 4 frames, and I believe you can't do it immediately at the ground. So this means it's like a 16 frame overhead if you do it properly. So I'm throwing out these numbers: 20 frame, 19 frame, 16 frame. So let's put a little bit of context into these. Usually when people talk about reactions, if they're not like really experienced in fighting games, they talk about like the baseline human reaction time, like without considering the game at all. So what I mean is, in a vacuum, from my understanding at least, human reaction time is 15 frames. So that would be around like 245 milliseconds or a little bit under half a second. However, there are 2 issues with this number here. So one, it does not include the native delay. So this is the delay that's added to the game. So for Xrd, if we're talking about Xrd, as I mentioned before, PC, you can reduce the delay down to 1 frame, but console, PS4 is 4 frames, and arcade can be 5 frames up to around like 6 or 7 depending on where you're playing at. So that changes the baseline of what you could react to by quite a bit. So if we say that the baseline is 15 frames and you're at like best case scenario arcade, so additional 5 frames, now your baseline is 20. So if this is hitting you crouching like around frame 21 depending on your character, 20 or 21 depending on your character, this is essentially invisible in an arcade and very difficult to defend on a console, since the baseline there is going to be like 19 frames. Again, 4 frame native delay is included there. Then the other issue is mental stack. So it's not like I'm doing like a reaction checker where the light is red and it goes click when it turns green. It's not like that. In a fighting game, there's a lot of things that could happen. So if you take like, just using 6K as an example. So I do have Gatlings that lead into this overhead. It's not like Strive where she has like many. 5K, 6K, but you have a ton of options off this 5K. The kick is at the beginning of her chains that she can do. So she could do a ton of stuff off this. I could jump, I can go into low, I can go into another low, I could do the overhead, I could do an instant overhead, but I don't recommend you do this, that's kind of bad. But she can go into other chains, she can do a lot of things off the one button. So if you're talking about people can react this fast, it is like a contextual thing. So there's some spots where there's a lot of options, so you're not necessarily going to be able to react as fast as you would like to in a situation. So with that in mind, we do have characters like Chip and Millia. Chip also has like a very fast 6K, like 20 frames, also has extremely fast jabs and buttons in general. This move is advantage, is +2, so he can move before Millia, and is 16 frames total. So from the beginning of the move to the end of the move is 16 frames, meaning by the time I see him do this, he is advantage and is already mixing me up with something. This is a pretty common theme in Guilty Gear in general. You can do things like this in Strive as well. But this was all well and good in like the XX days. Everyone was just trying to make it like arcade because arcade was the standard. So things changed when we got to BlazBlue. So 2 things happened. BlazBlue means a move away from CRTs to like flat screens. Ironically, even though this generation's arcade games are basically PCs with 1 game on them, essentially, they ended up having more delay because of the setup. So, especially if anyone who's watching this has ever gotten the chance to play in a Japanese arcade, you could expect the delay to be from around 5 frames, as I mentioned before, to as bad as like 7 or 8 frames, which is a significant jump from 3 frames that we expected from games like Guilty Gear XX. But this also reflects in the speed of many things. So, using the same benchmark then, good mix-up, command overheads, things like that in BlazBlue tend to be between like 21 and 23 frames. So I have my longtime main Lychee on the screen, and she has 2. So she has a 6A and 4D. So both of these moves are 22 frames. Jabs in BlazBlue, it kind of depends on the version. At best, they're around like 15 frames. At worst, like 20 frames total from start to end. Just talking about the entire move. Lychee's 2A, for example, is 19. So in Guilty Gear XX, this would be considered quite slow. Quite slow. But you have to remember, the game is also slower in general. If you watch old versions of BlazBlue, you'll see a game that's not only much slower, but also has more hit stop, which means everything just looks way slower if you put Guilty Gear XX on one side of like characters like Milia, Chip, or even characters like good old Soul Bad Guy, Kyle Kisuke doing their things, and old Lychee combos or old Makoto Nanaya combos that look like they take an eternity because of these two things. As I mentioned before, games like Guilty Gear, BlazBlue, and Persona on consoles have a different delay. So Exerd was 4 frames. I don't actually know what it was on PS3. I played it on PS4. But BlazBlue and Persona, because these games came out around the same time, on consoles are 3 frame delay. So that means the baseline is a little bit different. So all of a sudden now, in the home versions of games like BlazBlue and stuff, all of a sudden, these basically mix-up attacks like 6A and 4D, which like in arcade, they just appear. They just appear and you did it or you didn't do it. Now on console, you have a very consistent success rate of defending these type of structures and seeing these type of things. So if your character relies on this to attack people and make them worried, like build on their mental stack, make it difficult for them to defend you, you are really struggling, because now all of a sudden everything you want to use for mix-up does not work. An example character is Bang. So of course this is CF, but I'm going to be talking about an old game, BlazBlue CS1. Bang was top tier in this version. He tends to not be a good character in BlazBlue, but Bang was like a definitive top tier in this version. Very defining top tier. He was the, oh, he's so easy and does so much damage top tier that we hear about in every game. So he has this move, 5C, which starts on frame 18, but it hits crouchers on like frame 24 in that version, using Ragna as the baseline of when the move hits them, right? In arcades, pretty difficult to defend even still, right? So if you're saying that the game is, let's say 5 frame delay in arcades, then it's around like frame 20 you're going to be able to start seeing him coming down. You don't have a lot of time to do it. Where when the game is 3 frames, you have way more time to see this. So you see this hitting way less on consoles. Still hit people, because it is tricky and he does have a lot of options. However, just way less than normal. As opposed to a character like Valkenhayn, who we just talked about recently in a video, from a Halloween video, who has many ways of doing unreactable overheads to you. So he does not care whether it is 5 frame delay, or you're playing on a PS3, PS4, or you're playing on a PC with like lowest latency possible. He does not care. His selections do not change, and it will work in every single context. As you can put together on your own, the characters who have just faster stuff in general have great advantages the lower the delay is. So this brings us to games like Dragon Ball FighterZ and Strive. These games were released on consoles first, not arcades. And I mean, in Dragon Ball's case, this game does not have an arcade version at all. So the worst, aka the version with the most delay, is the console version, the PS4 version, the base PS4 version, which has 4 frames. This reflects in a ton of selections by character. So for example, we have to bring up the big boy Broly. So a lot of fast, good mix-up command grabs are between like 17 and 20-ish frames. So this one famously is 17 frames. I was just having a talk with a friend, and he was definitely like, people are still arguing whether or not you can just react to his arm going up. The answer is no, by the way, you guys are trolling. Usually EX versions of grab, so the versions that use resource, have more range and more return. So in Broly's case, his hits from all the way over here, and it leads into a combo. And they're almost always 24 frames. So Android 16 EX command grab, 24 frames. Light command grab, you guessed it, 17 frames. Base Goku, light command grab, and EX command grab, both 20 frames. Janemba, light command grab, 20 frames, but reaches from really far. EX command grab, once again, 24 frames. Good old Dragon Rush, 19 frames startup, but you can tech until around 23 to 24 frames. Universal Overhead, 24 frames. I don't know about you, but you can kind of see a pattern here in Dragon Ball. On top of that too, they took away so many actual, quote-unquote, actual 50-50s. They were really not a fan of characters being able to set up high-low 50-50s really easily, with especially for assists that did like multiple things. But they compensate by a lot of characters having these type of selections, like these type of like really fast grab selections that the defender can interact with. Some characters, on the other hand, are really struggle bus when the delay is really low because their mix-up selection doesn't work as well. So in Roshi's case, for example, you have this. So this is his command grab. This is 28 frames. There are a bunch of characters who had like 26, 27, 28, 29, 30 command grabs, like that kind of range. And it had such a low success rate. In the case of Roshi, his at least animates kind of tricky, but they've had to buff the speed of certain characters' moves. Jiren comes to mind with his 5H, for example. So in Strive's case, the PS5 version got sped up to match PS4 Pro at 2 frames input delay. And some things have been sped up since the game has come out as well. So take Anji, for example. So Anji's been struggling in the game overall, but they have been buffing things over time, making things a lot faster. So for him, it was 2 major things. So one is this move. So this move used to be 38 frames startup when the game released. Now it's like 29 frames. The bigger one for sure is the follow-up to Fusion that's an overhead. So this used to be 25 frames. Now it's 21 frames. At 25 frames, this move is basically worthless on PC. It's probably like just so hard to actually hit someone with this. If you saw the old one, this is what it looks like right now. The old one probably looks something more like that, and that's being generous. Like, I'm putting that little delay, but if you saw the classic like release version of this move, you could just see him slowly dragging his arm over his head as he finally hits you with the overhead. It is way stronger on console now. I thought it was relatively easy to defend against all his options when the game came out. Now that overhead is quite threatening, and even though he doesn't get a combo off it normally, they just get knocked down just like that. With Resource, this is a very strong starter. Chip got the opposite end, so we have K Alpha Blade. So when the game came out, this move was 24 frames, basically fine on PC, but pretty difficult to defend on console. And this was actually the first time I saw a dev note in an Arc System Works game that said they made it slower because on some platforms it's harder to defend. They said it straight up in the 1.10 patch note changes. So with Defend the North basically saying that it can be done, there were arguments for a long time saying that it was really hard to do a PC only offline event at that kind of a scale. It has been done before at DreamHack Anaheim. They had a PC only tournament. I don't know how many setups they had, but generally times where fighting game tournaments are PC are usually at small invitationals, like 8-man invitationals, and they just use one PC. This is the first time they ran many games with many entrants. So I think it's really important on the dev side to make sure all the characters can compete in low delay contexts. I mentioned it in other videos, and I talk about it on stream sometime, but not a bigger than a small part of my character selection is actually around, can they hit you anywhere? It was a really big thing I learned from BlazBlue, because BlazBlue had delay-based netcode, so I knew there were some things that people were doing online. You know, people, if you're not going to tournaments, it doesn't matter. So I knew like some things only work online when there's more delay, and when there's less delay, some things do not work anymore. And I tried to pick characters that don't really care about that much. You can see in my history. So characters like Lychee, Valkenhayn, Mitsuru, the original Mitsuru, Lilia. I switched to Baiken was also partly because she can hit you on any platform. I actually do think about this like quite a bit. The perspective I want to use, because usually when I try to have this discussion with people, they're just like, dude, it just makes sense to go for as low delay as possible. Like, why do you care so much about this? And I think if I put it from this perspective, it will make more sense. I just don't want characters to be literally left behind and have things that are just useless that you can't use because the games are balanced around X delay and then we reduce it, which just leaves some characters in the dust. I do feel like they are thinking about this between slowdowns to certain moves that I showed, like Chips K Alpha, and things just being sped up in general. So I do have hope for this, but that's just where this take comes from in general. As we move into the next generation of fighting games, Street Fighter 6, we'll see what Capcom does, of course, and then the real big kid in the back, Project L, is probably the first major fighting game that's going to be made for PC, as in PC is the main platform. So we'll see what they end up doing there. Hopefully that all made sense. I know this one was kind of a long one. I used a lot of like technical terms and stuff. As usual, if you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. This is something I feel pretty strong about. I've definitely had these thoughts about delay since like Persona 4 Ultimax, I want to say. I remember having a conflicted heart in specifically BBCP 1.1 when I was playing Kokonoe, because I remember watching like top Kokonoe arcade players just cracking people over and over and over with her 6B. Her 6B is 25 frames. And I could not hit like Timmy, like just randoms. I'm like, just random people would just defend this, no problem. I just did not understand. Why does it work here against the best players and not here where, I mean, the level was just lower in the US at the time. And eventually we kind of got into this native delay discussion, and I just felt like this for a very long time. So hopefully it all makes sense. Like and subscribe if you guys feel like it. I'll see y'all next time. Peace out.
Here comes a new challenger!